You're listening to 89.5 FM, KOPN Columbia. And we have an extraordinary show for you this evening that takes a little bit more organizing than usual to get on the air. And our host, Grace Vega, will explain to you in her intro why it takes a little bit more organizing to get into. So we'll be back with you in a moment while Grace and David Owens and our guests, David is our manager helping out, are getting organized. I will share this important message from the station with you. This program is brought to you by listener support and a donation from the We Always Swing Jazz Series. The Jazz Series celebrates International Jazz Day, April 30th at the Blue Note, when the SF Jazz Collective brings the music of Miles Davis to Columbia. Tickets and more information can be found by calling the We Always Swing Jazz Series at 449-3009 or by visiting wealwayswing.org. And Grace and the guests and David will let us know when they are ready to go on the air. Grace, are you almost ready?
I believe so.
Okay, Grace, you're on mic 4. Let me turn it on.
Good evening.
No, you're on 3.
All right.
Go ahead.
Good evening. Nice to be here with you all again at Women's Issues, Women's Voices. As Carol introduced, we have an extraordinary show with some wonderful guests. There are 5 of us in the studio tonight in the air room, as I just learned the term for, I think. I did that right? Did I do that right, Carol? We have, I think you've heard me mention before that I, for a number of years in this town, worked in the area of language access in healthcare, which meant my job was to ensure equal access to all medical services and facilities for limited English proficient patients. That meant people whose first language was not English, and our deaf and hard of hearing patients. At the tail end of my time, my 8 years doing that work, I discovered there was another group of folks that we were really not doing justice as far as communication issues, and began that work. Didn't get it finished, but began working in the area also of how to better communicate and better facilitate access to health care for our patients who are blind and visually impaired. So tonight I was pondering what to do for this evening's show, and I thought about the many things I learned about communities of deaf community, people with the disability of deafness, with hearing, who are hard of hearing, people who are blind, people who are visually impaired, and realized if I, whose job was to find out about this, continually am learning new things, I knew that our listeners needed to know even more how we could learn to stop disempowering, discriminating, and discouraging people who are deaf or blind or blind. Things are better today than decades or centuries ago for people who are deaf or blind. However, the disparities to access to education, employment, and services like healthcare are still immense. As I said, I learned over 8 years at the University Healthcare System how immense the chasm could be between the understanding of normative folks who don't have those particular disabilities and the folks who do. So tonight we have with us my friend Angie Esser. Angie, I think right now I've discovered, is a very busy person who was very kind to take time out of her schedule of both working, probably full-time, and also working on I think a master's in social work. And Angie also happens to be, am I right?
That's right. I'm working part-time.
Working part-time. All right. Very good. Angie helped me with workshops back when I was working in the healthcare system, trying to help people learn and understand more about how to better provide access to health care for the deaf and hard of hearing patients. And she conceded to come with us tonight, along with Kathy Christensen, one of my favorite people, an absolutely amazing American Sign Language interpreter and an amazing person. Glad to have Kathy in the studio in the air room with us. And along with Kathy and Angie, we have Gretchen Mowney. Did I say it right, Gretchen?
Yeah.
Rhymes with Brownie.
Yeah.
I'm cheating. I have it written down on my paper, so I said it right. And Gretchen is a fellow activist who's been on shows here before discussing her activism in a variety of areas. I don't remember all of those. Women, I know feminist issues, maybe women's reproductive rights. Am I right, Gretchen?
Yeah.
That's a biggie.
A lot of things, yeah.
A lot of things. But we're not here to talk as much about those tonight as we are about the issues, the challenges that people face when they are blind or visually impaired. And again, a world that doesn't think about the fact that everyone isn't seeing what's in front of them or particularly hearing what's around them. So tonight, get ready for some help on a continuous journey, or what I hope is a continuous journey for all of us, in bringing folks in from the margins by helping eventually dismantle attitudes and systems of oppression by putting into place all the stuff we're going to learn tonight. So we're going to start, and I'm going to ask folks to be patient. Kathy, when she interprets, of course, has to hear what's being said and then interpret that to Angie. So there may be a few pauses, and I want you to imagine in those pauses, as Angie and I are visiting first this evening, I want you to imagine hands and fingers flying and every visual expression on someone's face that you can possibly imagine. And even a mouth moving at the same time, because that's what goes on with an ASL interpreter. And I'm fortunate to get to watch Kathy in action. But you can just close your eyes and imagine. But give some time, don't be surprised at the brief pauses as communication happens in a pretty amazing way. We'll get started, and additionally, I do want to mention, so folks can let their friends know who, if you have some deaf or hearing impaired friends, we are actually filming this tonight with a 3D camera. It does 365 degree filming and videotaping, and we will be posting this on YouTube so that hopefully some of the deaf community will be able to have access to this evening as well. And I think that's a pretty exciting development. Mm-hmm. We'll be talking about some technology tonight, and that's one that's very helpful. So tonight, getting ready for you, Angie. One of the things, or some of the things I learned after I finally realized I wasn't just dealing with spoken languages, but the language of ASL, and I realized that American Sign Language was its own language system, and it wasn't based on standard English, and that was a big surprise for me. And I will confess, I think it was 2 or 3 years before I really grasped that in my work, I hate to say. And I also learned that within our system, when we asked people if they were deaf and needed an interpreter, that's all we ever asked. We never ever recognized that there might be deaf people who didn't use ASL and might use other ways of communication. Again, I was a few years into my work. Before that, I discovered that. I'll tell a little story. The way I discovered it was I had a patient who someone had indicated was deaf in her patient record, and we kept calling Kathy or someone like her to come to the patient's appointments, and the patient kept turning the interpreters away. And finally, after that happened several times, I called the number that was in the patient record to ask the patient why she was not using the interpreters we were providing. I got her mother, who told me that the patient was not deaf. She didn't use an ASL interpreter because she actually was unable to speak. And that had never been addressed with any of her providers and or other staff. I was embarrassed, needless to say, and I began my research, which Kathy helped a lot with, of discovering what other communication issues we were actually should be dealing with. That was a different one than deafness, which we did actually obviously have to deal with, but Kathy then taught me there were lots of different modes of communication that people needed to use for a variety of reasons. So if you wouldn't mind tonight, Angie, starting off by telling us, my first thought is, who does learn American Sign Language? How and where are they learning American Sign Language? And why don't some people learn American Sign Language to communicate?
Sure, definitely. So, people who tend to learn American Sign Language are, obviously deaf people, and also people who want to communicate with deaf people who use ASL. That's their motivation to learn. And also,
can you speak a little louder? Thank you.
So also, some people who can't speak very well for some reason, some people with autism learn sign language, or perhaps their parents or family members learn sign language to communicate with them. They're nonverbal. And I've met several people who can hear who lost the ability to speak, who went ahead and learned sign language. And so those are individuals who might tend to learn sign language. Family members who are hearing who have deaf family members might learn. My family is an example. So your question as to how you learn sign language, some people learn naturally through interactions with deaf people. If a child is born deaf, perhaps, they don't have that ability, but for kids who are born to deaf parents, they would naturally have that ability to pick up sign language. So it's through exposure. And also, if a child is born deaf, perhaps the parents might go to a class. I know that the deaf school provides educational opportunities as an outreach teacher. There's also outreach teachers that go into the home and train parents and families. Sometimes kids don't have any access to learning sign language until they get into school and learn other kids use sign language and learn from them. Maybe go to a deaf camp. Sometimes they will go to public schools, and then they end up going to a deaf university like Gallaudet University, and there are deaf people there. They have language institutes. It's funny that they call it that because many students learn sign language during the summertime before they actually start their admission in Gallaudet in the fall. There's also at Gallaudet some students who come from other countries who use other sign systems that learn ASL there. So it's really interesting. They have classes in the community, or college level classes. MU has sign language classes that people take. So there's a variety of different ways you can learn.
My other question was, which you may have forgotten by now, because I posed all those questions at once. Why do deaf people, who are generally or often people who are deaf who don't learn sign language, and how do they communicate if they don't communicate with American Sign Language?
Right. And then you also asked me kind of the difference between that. Okay, yes. So there are some deaf people who do not learn sign language, and that might be because sometimes if a child is born to parents who are not deaf, or if later they become deaf, perhaps their parents choose for them and decide they want a completely oral approach, and so the child has no exposure. Or perhaps they learn English. I learned English growing up. I learned English Sign Language. There was a system called C2, Signing Exact English. My parents picked that as the modality to use, and I didn't learn American Sign Language until much later. I had some exposure as a child, but it was actually when I went to Gallaudet that I really had more immersion with ASL as I was socializing with deaf people. Some deaf just become deaf later in life, and they might get a cochlear implant, and they end up communicating just fine. So there are a variety of reasons why deaf people may or may not learn sign language.
Well, I've got a little question here. Carol passed it to me, and it is a question that was a big question within the healthcare system. I would find that someone who had indicated that they were an ASL user had not been provided an interpreter, and I'd ask a provider or staff person why they didn't use one and how they communicated, and they'd say, well, they read lips. I again began to investigate that and discovered that reading lips is a whole lot harder than most people believe. So, can you tell me, do a lot of people truly read lips well?
No. So really, you only see a small percentage of communication on the lips. So it requires a lot of cognitive processing and guessing and context. And that is only if the deaf person can actually has some understanding of speech and how speech works. And so if you don't get that training, or if you don't have exposure to speech, what it sounds like, what it looks like on the mouth, and if you don't get that training, and even if you do, you can only see at most, I believe the statistic is 40% of the information, and everything else is through context and assumption. And some people are more skilled at that than others. Some people fake it and they nod like they understand, but they don't actually understand. They just want to make the other party happy in that communication endeavor.
Wow. So, like I say, I heard that many, many times. Oh, he read lips. So we just went ahead and I talked and they read my lips. And so thank you for clarifying that for our listeners. I hope
Right,
folks
and
will.
I don't mind, can I add one more comment to that?
Yes, please.
Just really quickly, some providers think that if a person can write, that understanding is happening, and they go ahead with the appointment. But they don't actually know that person. They write back and forth with the doctor. They're diagnosed with some severe illness, and they're writing back and forth with the doctor. And somehow, I mean, there might not have been an interpreter for that appointment. At the conclusion of the appointment, this person came to me and said, see all of these words on the paper, what does that mean? So they took the paper and had to ask for clarification later. They asked me to explain that to them. The doctor, really had a poor prognosis. And they said, what is a poor prognosis? What does that mean? And really, that was the doctor's responsibility to explain that to the patient. The deaf person didn't know what the word prognosis was. And I've had that experience. So I said, I think that you need to call your doctor again and make an appointment and make sure there's an interpreter there with you so you can get your questions clarified.
So you're also saying not only is it a fallacy to believe that lip reading is a skill that's going to help people, hearing people communicate with deaf and hard of hearing folks, but also the whole idea of writing notes back and forth should not be an assumption that anyone ever makes with a patient who's deaf.
Not all deaf people are proficient at literacy in English.
And why is that?
Well, I think some people make that assumption because they have some sort of, perhaps deaf people have some sort of cognitive problem, and that's not necessarily the case. A lot of deaf people are not exposed to language until later. And then it also depends on what language they're exposed to. I mean, and I'm not really even talking about not being exposed to English early enough. There's deaf people who are raised and they have exposure to ASL early as a first language. It's easier to acquire English as a second language after you have a first language. But if you don't have any exposure to either English or ASL, then you're going to struggle to learn a primary language, much less trying to pick up a secondary language like English, because you don't have full comprehension of either. So it's a real struggle, and it really doesn't have anything to do with their intellectual capacity. Some people, have other disabilities as well as deafness, but most of the time, that really doesn't have anything to do with their cognitive abilities or their ability to learn. It's just language deprivation. Thank you.
Thank you again for some great clarification. Another question Carol's asking is, do some, I've known some people, and maybe Carol has too, known some deaf people who actually speak as well as sign. And how does that happen? Why do some people actually speak English as well as sign and maybe communicate in a variety of other ways if they're deaf?
Well, there's a variety of reasons. Some deaf people do have the ability to speak, and some deaf people have the ability to have functional hearing. Maybe they had received a cochlear implant early, or they had access to hearing aids early, or they had enough exposure to being able to hear to be able to benefit from hearing aids. Some people went to an auditory oral program or a total communication program that emphasized speaking and signing. I speak marginally well. It sort of depends on the situation and with who, but I had really good. I don't have the facility with it that some deaf people do.
Okay.
I mean, some, they benefit from implants, they benefit from hearing aids, and they are able to learn how to speak through strong speech therapy, and that's a lot of work. It's really tough. Some deaf people decide to keep that skill up and use both sign language and be able to kind of transition between the hearing world and the deaf world.
I'm thinking
And
of
some
Marley
deaf
Maitland,
people-
right?
Right. And I'm not really sure exactly what her first language was, but she has had exposure to both, and she has functional skills in both, and I think it's nice to have that. You know, she's a successful person, and she was able to take advantage of that.
But once again, that's I think the ability. Well, my experience over those 8 years was that there weren't too many folks who were deaf who spoke as well as signed in other means. Once again, assumptions shouldn't be made about anyone, right? The way to find this out is to ask what someone's preferred method of communication is.
Yes. And also, just from observation as to what works. Because, like with any patient that you're exposed to, you know, you go through observation and you notice, oh, I don't necessarily know that was very successful in this situation. Maybe that mode might work well in a different situation, but maybe in the situation we're presently in, we need to follow something different. So, go with what works.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take just a moment to let everyone in on who's here tonight, in case you are just now tuning in. This is Grace Vega. This is Women's Issues, Women's Voices. I'm here with Carol Greenspan, an old hand at this show and keeping us on track by running the boards. And I'm also here with our guests, Angie Esser and Gretchen Mowney, who hasn't joined us yet, but she will soon, Kathy Christensen, and we are discussing women's voices and issues around blindness and deafness, and we're learning lots. I wanted to ask one more question of Angie before we turn it over to Gretchen
Sure.
to do some heavy-duty teaching tonight. And I wanted to know, Angie, another thing I learned after I started my work in healthcare language access was that there is deaf with a big D and there is deaf with a small d. And I was told that deaf with a big D, and I think it was Kathy that told me, was referring to whether someone was part or considered themselves part of deaf culture. Could you explain what on earth that means?
It tends to mean that a person identifies with the group of people who use American Sign Language as their preferred language, or who identify as a deaf individual part of that linguistic group. And really, like any culture, there's kind of different connections as to how enmeshed people are within the culture. So really, there's gradients of people who identify. Maybe they were born to deaf parents, they are generationally deaf, they're really enmeshed in the culture, they're really enmeshed in American Sign Language. And then it extends out to people who are more on the fringes of that culture. Maybe those people are born to deaf family, but they're hearing. Maybe they're interpreters, they're not actually members of the community, but they use sign language. Maybe there was somebody who grew up in a family that could hear, and so they identify with hearing family members, but are also deaf themselves. So a big D deaf means a person who strongly identifies in using the language of deaf people, American Sign Language. They understand deaf humor, they understand the cultural implications of deaf storytelling, They're very connected with the schools, the residential schools for the deaf, deaf clubs, deaf organizations, and they've been through this. In American history, there's deaf people that they have their own history in our country. And so there's kind of this big group of individuals that culturally identify as deaf.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to check with Carol. Carol, do you have any questions before we move on to Gretchen?
Yes, I have two. I did workshops in a prison for a long time, and one of our facilitators was a deaf interpreter in town, a wonderful woman, and she taught us to sign "Thank You, God." And now remember, we're in a prison, and she was teaching the prisoners to say "Thank you, God," and when they did it, their whole face lit up. So can you teach us how to say "Thank you, God" in sign language? Because thank you for all of this diversity and wonderful, wonderful learning that we're doing.
Sure. So I can teach the sign for thank you. And if you can imagine, to describe this, your hand shape is in the shape of a 5. So if you're looking at the palm of your hand, it's your full open hand, 5 hand. Your fingers are up to your chin, touching your chin. Then move your hand away from your mouth, and that's the sign for thank you. It's like you're offering something to another individual. So your full outstretched palm of your hand from your mouth and out. I'm hoping that I'm explaining it. If not, you can Google it. They have lots of ASL signs.
Doing a great job.
It's perfect.
Yeah, so there's lots.
And God. Thank you, God.
So if you're talking about God, some people point upwards to heaven. And then there's a shape, like with your forehand shape, with your thumb bent in on the palm, and your fingers are together. So your thumb is inside on the palm of your hand, and if you can envision this, you start upwards and bring it down towards your body. So you point to the sky, and then you bring your hand shape down in front of your body. And there are other signs for that as well.
I won't ask how to say thank you, Angie, because I think we would have to spell her name, and that would take too long to teach. So I'm going to say thank you.
Again, everything's available online. The internet is a wonderful thing.
So,
And
thank you, and I like the one where your hand goes up in the air. So thank you, God, pointing up in the air.
And if you want to really learn, find a deaf person.
Okay. My second question was, I got introduced to, vaguely at least, to deafness by the media who had shows about this amazing woman who was both deaf and blind, and she learned to speak from the vibrations of the throat of speaking people. What was her name? Does anybody know her name? She's very famous. She was British.
Is this a recent person or a person from a
No,
long time ago?
it's one of the first people who.
Are you referring to Helen Keller?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, of course. The famous person who introduced us in the hearing world to the deaf world, at least a little bit.
And Kathy actually has an interpreting business and has had an interpreter who actually is an interpreter for people who are deaf and blind, and uses tactile sign. Did I use that description correctly, Kathy?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Right here in our community. And I thought that was fascinating as well. Gretchen, you're up. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So Gretchen is here with us, Gretchen Mowney again, and she actually brought a friend along as well, but I can't see her friend right now. Her guide dog is a beautiful, I don't know what kind of dog, because I don't know much about dogs either.
He's a golden retriever.
Golden retriever. And she, if we have time, she'll give you all a few tips on what all the many things you should not do with that dog. which basically is engaged with that dog. It's a work animal. But we'll leave that till later. And Gretchen, I will also make confessions here that, so my job at the start, I knew I was to provide sign language and other kinds of communication for deaf and hard of hearing folks, but I was not assigned to work on anything that had to do with perhaps inability to access care for people who were blind or visually impaired. And I then had friends at some point who started telling me some of their issues when they came to the doctor, including the fact that we handed out paper to people all the time to give them instructions on how to take their medicine, on what their procedure was going to be like, at what time to come to the hospital. And they reminded me that that paper, they couldn't see it. And taking it home, they couldn't use any technology on that paper to have it read if there was no one home. And so I had one of those duh moments. My mother doesn't really, always said that was a bad word. I shouldn't use duh. But I had one of those moments where I thought, wow, Grace, where have you been? And started working. Got together a group of folks, some who were blind and some who were visually impaired, and we began to brainstorm ways to better work with our patients. I would like you, if you would, to tell us some of the things, I asked you to think of 4 or 5 things that you really wanted folks to know about how to, as I said, was opened up to stop disempowering, discouraging, discriminating against folks who are blind and visually impaired. So give us a few pointers.
Well, first, if I can just piggyback on what you were mentioning, luckily and I guess this will go to the first item. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Great.
Coming through loud and clear.
Wonderful. Yeah, I don't usually have too much of a problem not being loud. So this is, as an odd a thing it is to say, yes, blind and deaf folks have been around for all time, but this is a pretty darn good time to be blind. There is technology now that can do all sorts of things. I have a scanner and optical character recognition, commonly called OCR, program at home, so I can scan print documents. And most blind people I know have that. But the issue is that it's not very accurate, and it takes a lot of time, and it's a pain in the butt. So, one thing that people don't realize a lot, and I still come across all the time, is that yes, blind people can use computers, we can use cell phones, we can use all sorts of things, but I totally understand why people don't know this, because I went blind 10 years ago in my mid-20s, and I suddenly lost my sight. It would take a while to explain all of that, so I won't, but it was very sudden, and I didn't know. I had no disability before that, hadn't really been around people with disabilities. I didn't know that blind people could do pretty much everything, but maybe drive a car or fly a plane. And honestly, I can't still drive, I just don't do it. So we can use computers, and we can pretty much do anything. It's just we use them differently. So blind people use screen readers. Just kind of like it sounds. It reads the screen. It's just some software. And same thing on cell phones. The iPhone comes with a built-in screen reader, which is pretty great. VoiceOver. And so that is one important thing to know. I would say the biggest difficulty I face, and frequently, I'll give a quick preface here, actually. While there isn't blind culture in quite the same way, certainly as deaf culture, there is still, when I talk to other blind people, if they are part of the blind community, we all know certain things and kind of get certain things. So there's culture still, it's just, I wouldn't say it's quite as vivid, for lack of a better term right now, as deaf culture. So I'm very involved in the blind community, both locally, statewide, and nationally. Go to conventions every year and know lots of blind people throughout the world. I'd say one of the biggest things that holds us back is people's incorrect assumptions about our abilities. And it happens for everybody. Like I said, before I went blind, I didn't think blind people could use computers or ride bikes or go cook, build fire, all the different things I do now. But it's just doing things a little bit differently. And so that's one of the big things, I guess. Other things to know are, I guess I will mention my service dog, my guide dog here. And just, I meet a lot of people who do know this, but I also meet a lot of people who don't. So always try to let people know when I have a chance that it's important for any kind of service dog, any kind of working dog, whether it's a guide dog or a hearing dog or a dog that helps people who use wheelchairs or detects low blood sugar for someone with diabetes. All those dogs have a job. They are trained professionals, and so when they are working, they need, since dogs are really, really smart, but kind of in a lot of ways have the mentality of a 3-year-old from what I've read, they need humans around them to understand how important their job is and to ignore them. And to, so you're helping out by doing that, because it's, since they don't have years of experience and the knowledge and understanding quite of everything surrounding that, they are a dog and they're really well trained, but they also can get distracted easily by people trying to distract them in different ways. And for me, if that happens, that could mean running into something. That could mean being late for meetings. All these things have happened. This last one, though, it could mean getting hit by a car. And luckily that has not happened yet, but it's been very close before. So, and I've had blind friends who have been hit by cars. That is why we need to focus. That's why that dog needs to focus. For people that have other disabilities, that can mean also lots of issues, just different than mine. So, I know that it can be hard. I mean, sometimes when I'm hanging out with friends with service dogs, I get the urge to ruffle their fur and scratch them behind the ears, but I know how important it is not to. And then the last item here, and then I'll stop talking for a minute, so you guys can ask more questions, but is that one of the most difficult things I've had trouble adapting with is, and again, it relates to other people, because my own stuff, I've adapted how I put on my makeup and organize my clothes and go camping and everything, but is being able to, honestly, going back to communication. So networking and socializing can be really difficult because, and we could have a whole even show on this because of the psychological implications, but not being able to read body language and not being able to read someone's face. Which we rely on pretty much unconsciously all the time without even thinking about it. We're reacting to how people are looking or doing things. And also, so what comes into that, people that I'm close to help me out sometimes by saying I'm smiling and things, because it's really, it sucks to never be able to see people smile anymore. And it's nice to know that when someone is. Not being able to make eye contact. And then one thing that happens a lot that's actually pretty funny is people will come up to me or pass me on the street or at a meeting and say, "Hey Gretchen, what's up?" And as normal as that seems, for me, it's like, "Hey, you," because there is not really any way for me to know who that person is unless they have a really distinctive voice and I have it down, or I know that person really, really well. It's one of my best friends, and so I know their voice. The best way around that is simply whenever you do come across a blind person with low vision, to simply say, "Hey Gretchen, it's Grace Vega," and so that helps me out a lot, and that helps other blind people out a lot too. And I added the last name because people will come up to me sometimes. Some people that have got this a little bit, they'll say, "Hey Gretchen, it's Sarah," for example, and that still only helps me so far because there's a lot of Sarahs out there. So I'll start scanning in my brain and being like, okay, where am I at? Which Sarah might this be? And
Wow.
yeah.
Very good. I was thinking of the kind of the same, now Angie, I'm going to ask you a question to come into what Gretchen was mentioning here. So for you, I'm sure people aren't often in front of you and say hello without remembering that you can't hear them. Have you got a suggestion? How do your friends who run into you on the street make sure that you're aware that they're there and speaking to you? What's the best? What niche can you give us?
Okay. Well, we just tend to make sure that we have the the body, the attention.
Just a sec. When all the mics are on, the sound sounds very tinny. So let me turn your mic on. It wasn't on when you started talking there. I'm sorry about that.
Would you want me to start over?
Yeah, please.
Sure.
Okay,
yeah,
that's
please.
fine. So just to be sure that the person has my attention. If you're going to start a conversation with me, make sure that you wave or gesture, get my attention.
Is it better to
just
wave
sign-
than to touch you?
Really, well, if you don't know me well, I think waving would probably be preferable. But if it's somebody who's close to me, then it feels more natural. Natural to just touch somebody on the shoulder. That's fine. Even if you perhaps don't know them as well. I mean, because sometimes it does feel awkward to jump in front of somebody and wave your arm. But if you're from farther away, waving would be fine.
Gretchen, touching.
Yeah. For me, and again, as I think we both are, just talking from our own experience, life experience as having a disability and what it is. But I don't really like a lot of touching. So just like, and that's throughout our culture, it's nice to ask before you hug someone. I think a lot of people know that. And though that can be difficult, so I prefer someone speaking to me. That is one issue that does happen a lot, is blind people get touched a lot, sometimes even grabbed a lot, and dragged different places, things like that. People get, I think, nervous sometimes about talking to us for some reason because the best theory I've read is people are uncomfortable about not being able to look people in the eye, or they have assumptions about how to interact, maybe. But just talking works great, and
identifying ourselves when we talk.
Yeah, totally. That's really helpful.
Now I'm going to ask you both a question, something that's been a concern to me, which should be a bigger concern for you all. But in the meantime, I'm going to reintroduce us. This is KOPN 89.5. The show is Women's Voices, Women's Issues. And I am here with Carol Greenspan, my super helper and coach and mentor, and also with Angie Esser and Gretchen Mowney and Kathy Christensen. We are discussing issues that relate to blindness or visual impairments and or deafness and being hard of hearing. And Carol again scribbled me a note, and she mentions the concern as well. She mentions that she knew someone back when she was in school who was a law student at Harvard who cooked in her kitchen who was blind, right, Carol?
Harvard Law School. Harvard Law School. My roommate organized some of the pots and such in the kitchen, so he could come in and cook as if he lived there. They were best friends.
This guy, law degree, but you mentioned a
The
problem.
last I saw that roommate was some years ago at a convention, and he had never had a job equivalent to his education, training, abilities. He was able to support himself. We didn't have much time, but the discrimination was clearly very serious.
Oh, yeah.
We are running into a problem with I think that's David. We have one of our long time engineers up here today, and he's been ill and not available to us, and so I think that's probably our station manager with our longtime engineer. Gratefully, thank goodness he's back as both to KOPN, and he's a wonderful man. So forgive them for interrupting Grace's show.
And I certainly do. We'll give them a moment to finish this test. There we go. I think they're done. The question is, oh, maybe not. My question, what about employment? How much harder is it to get? If you, Gretchen, I think I saw on Facebook, you mentioned you've gone to some sort of seminar, and the discussion was about whether you told people you were blind or not when you applied for jobs.
Yes. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. Blind people in the United States actually have the highest unemployment rate of any marginalized group. Our unemployment rate is 70%.
Wow.
And yes, I was at a conference recently that I was presenting at, but thankfully got to go to some other sessions when I wasn't presenting, and there was a discussion of disability and whether to reveal your disability or not if you have that choice. Obviously, some of us, our disabilities are very visible. So, unfortunately, it's very common, and like I mentioned, one of the most important things that I want people to know about blind people is about assumptions, and not to assume what we can and can't do, because that happens a lot when it comes to not just living our lives, but more importantly, unfortunately, I'm going to say more importantly, employment, because we need to be able to get employed, to be able to, well, contribute to our world, make money to live on, to get health care, to go on vacation, all of those things. You certainly can't get enough money to do that just through disability. So that's why it's so important. And so many employers, despite that the ADA says they aren't allowed to discriminate, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And it's very easy for an employer to say, we simply thought the other candidate was more qualified, whether they are or aren't. And it's very hard, almost impossible sometimes, to prove discrimination.
Angie, how about the deaf community? Same experience? I think Gretchen's sort of
Almost exactly the same. I would say the same thing that Gretchen said, don't make assumptions. And so not only will employers assume before hiring any person deaf or with other disabilities, but they assume based on their experiences with one person from a population. And from that, they make assumptions on the rest of us. So I've experienced applying for a job previously where the person said, you know, you seem like perhaps you could do this job. You seem like you're nice enough. But we had a really bad experience with a person who was deaf in that job before, and so we just don't feel comfortable offering this job to you.
wow.
Right, and so don't assume based on your experience with one individual. They don't represent the whole population.
All right, we're still having the buzz. We're going to keep on going here and hope folks can hear us over that hum while they try to work out this technical issue. My question for you both, think a moment. We've got 5 minutes. I don't know if it's, the time flies. This hour goes by so quickly, and I always have so much I hope we can get to help folks learn. But my question now, we've talked about a few pet peeves, I think. If you have something else that you think is especially important for those of us who have sight, have hearing, to know, to make things a bit easier, a bit less, I don't know what term I want to use, but what should we be doing when we are meeting folks who are deaf or blind? We've talked about how to greet. We've talked about things to tell you about what's going on around us. Anything else you'd like folks to know? Where can people learn more on their own? Because that's one of the things we need to do is be doing our own work. Not making you come into a studio all the time to come and tell us, thank you, that's gone. So where can we learn more about how to work more productively with our friends and neighbors and community members who happen to be deaf or blind?
So really, what you initially said about how to approach people.
Just a moment. Your mic was off again. Your mic was off again.
There we go.
Go ahead.
So how you approach people, I mean, I think don't overdo it. Don't over move your mouth. Don't over gesticulate and use your expressions. Relax. Interact normally. It actually makes it harder to try to speech read you or understand your communication if you're exaggerating it. You can write a question on a paper. Can you understand this? Is this something that works for you? Ask people. Just calm down and relax. And we'll let you know if there's a problem. And if it doesn't work, we'll let you know. But yeah, you just ask first.
Thank you, Angie.
And then also how they find out about other resources and doing research, I would say online. For ASL, LifePrint is a pretty good resource. YouTube is a pretty good resource.
Okay, that's lifeprint.com. Is that what that would be?
I believe so. And she was saying the Missouri Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. So it's mcdhh.mo.gov. They have a lot of resources and information available. And I'm trying to think of what else. The National Association for the Deaf, the NAD.org, I believe is the website for that.
Okay.
And I think that there are other websites too. You can Google that. I can't remember all of them.
That's all right.
But
Quite
yeah,
all right.
Google it.
Good help. Gretchen.
Yes, I really liked what she had to say. Honestly, just making sure that when you meet us, to relax, or just doing your best to relax. I frequently, when people meet me, they try to overcorrect or they get very nervous and they're like, "It's good to see you." "Oh, I shouldn't have said see." And stuff like that happens a lot. Or they start just really focusing on my blindness and wanting to know all sorts of things about that. When it's important to realize, I think with any of us with disabilities, that is just one small part of my identity. I am many, many other things besides blind, and yet that's what happens a lot. So just realizing and relaxing and not being afraid of messing up. And yeah, just as she said, if you don't know, ask, and it's totally okay, and we'll also help you along as well. So I'd say a great place to get more resources on blindness-related topics and to learn more is to go to the American Council of the Blind's website. That's acb.org. Also, the American Foundation for the Blind. That is afb.org. I'm have been answering questions about this sort of thing for a long time now, 10 years I guess. And I am on Twitter at gmaune, that's Gmaune. Also on Facebook, so if you ask me a question, I might not get back with you immediately, but I will answer it and let you know.
Very good. Ladies, I can't tell you what a pleasure it was to have you this evening, to see you both again, and Kathy. Hope we can get together again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Carol, do we need to run a PSA at some point?
We have about 1 minute left of the show. So I would like each of you to if you can think of it quickly, to give us one thought. It might be a website URL or one sentence that you want to stay with people. And then we'll go to our closing.
Is there anything else?
Well, I would say assume competence.
Very good.
And you may have met one person, you have not met us all.
Ah,
Fantastic.
great wisdom. Assume competence. You may have met one deaf person, you haven't met every deaf person.
For KOPN's Women's Issues, Women's Voices.
Grace Vega? Gretchen,
And each of you announce your name.
go ahead and announce your names for us.
Angie Esser
Gretchen Mounty.
And
and Kathy Christensen.
This is KOPN Columbia.